Welcome to Untethered to Rooted, a podcast that brings you a collection of stories around grief, healing, and identity. Hear from everyday people how grief and loss shape their identity and how their identity shapes the way they heal and process grief. I'm your host, Dana Daugherty, a licensed psychotherapist with extensive experience dealing with grief, both personally and professionally. And if you want to hear stories with gems and practical tools for healing, stay tuned for more. Okay, hello to all of our listeners today. We have a special guest on here today for this episode of Untethered to Rooted. Today, we'll be exploring some questions that certainly have come up in my own work with clients, with friends and family members, and even for myself who have experienced loss and grief. And we know that grief can be about loss of significant people in our lives, but it can also be about changes or loss surrounding our identities and roles changes in our lives or events and situations that impact our lives significantly. And so when these life transitions come and we've experienced significant loss in particular, there are so many different feelings and questions that arise. And some questions I've heard come up that have even come up for myself in my own grief journey have been like, how do you grieve? Or how do I even do this? And as if there is something to do with it. And is there a specific or even right way to do this? And just kind of realizing that some things about us change as we allow ourselves to grieve and heal. And so our guest for today will be discussing more about this. And so before we get into it, I'd love to introduce Rachel Ann by way of her bio. Rachel Ann is a Christian life coach who guides millennial women of color without judgment as they navigate the journey of uncovering their authentic selves, helping them heal the past, ground the present, and enrich the future. With her 2 masters in counseling and over 10 years of coaching, counseling, and advising, she now develops mindset and wellness programs for Christian BIPOC women, equipping them with tools for self-sufficiency, healthy coping mechanisms, and mindfulness techniques. Rachel lives in New York City with her husband and 6 plant babies. I see one behind you. You can usually find her sipping boba, hugging cute puppies, or volunteering at her church. So welcome, Rachel. And I'd love for you to also introduce yourself. And I'd love for you to share what are some of your identities that are important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I am so ecstatic to be here. Like the level of excitement that I have is through the roof and through the sky. And so thank you so much, Dana, for having me on here today. Like Dana said, my name is Rachel Ann. I am a Christian life coach. I work with Christian women of color, and the identities that are really important to me. Wow, there's a lot of them. I would say the ones that probably pop up a lot is the fact that I am a Christian. I am a wife. I am a friend. I am a child of immigrants. I am a woman of color. I'm a wellness professional. Those are the ones that like really, really show up the most in my life. And as a life coach, I incorporate all of those things. And so through one-on-one coaching, through digital resources, through my group membership program, I also support Christian women of color in diving into all of that and what it means to be them and discover themselves and find the fulfillment in God and in their relationships in a way that's healthy.
Oh, amazing. Rachel will, help you and support you emotionally and also professionally and spiritually. She's just got it all wrapped up. It was great. It was great.
That's the goal. All of those things.
So what's something that people may not know about you, Rachel, but is important for what you'll share today with us?
Yeah. And so in regards to the conversation we're going to have today, an aspect of my identity, specifically my cultural identity. So my parents are immigrants from Egypt, and specifically they are part of the Coptic people. And so the Coptic people are the Black and Indigenous people of Egypt. So I'm a Black and Indigenous person living in the United States. And the reason I mention that is because there's a sense of collectiveness in a sense of protection that people who are Indigenous have, that other folks of color definitely do have, but there's a temptation to be happy about things, or to maybe make decisions that you wouldn't normally make in order to preserve your people. And that ties into what we will talk about. So I won't do any spoiler alerts, but I think that's something that not many people know about me, especially just looking at me. That's not something that people would know.
Yeah, that's important. Thanks for sharing that too. It's related to also your like family system and how you grew up and those particular values as well too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's dive into it. I'm wondering about your connection to this particular topic, some of the questions I prompted us with a little bit earlier. And what I mentioned about, like how do you grieve and is there a specific or right way to grieve? So yeah, I'd love for you to share a little bit about what your connection is to this or your experience with this.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that I have grieved. And I was like, wow, Dana, there are so many ways we can go. Um, I think the biggest, most prominent connection to grief that I'm currently dealing with right now is high level, is that I am grieving the desires and the dreams that I thought my life would be. So I am 33
Mm,
years old. There's a lot of things that I thought I would have in my life. There's a lot of things that I thought my life was going to go in terms of vocation, family relationships, my health, all of that. And so I'm grieving all of that.
mm,
And I think the specific one, so that we're not here for 5 hours, the specific one that I think we can highlight today is a relationship that I'm grieving. So I'm grieving a relationship that I have with my sibling. My sibling is still alive and is still around, but because of sibling abuse and harm that has been done, I've made the decision to be estranged from them, and that's a relationship that I'm grieving. Even though I decided to be estranged and I made that decision for my own physical and mental health, it's still a process. It's still a grief that I am going through, and a lot of people do. A lot of people, especially children of immigrants, there's a lot of family dysfunction that is very normalized, and there's a lot of abuse within the family that we don't really talk about. I'm not going to go into detail about the abuse. This is not my therapy session. But
sure.
what I will highlight is what it looks like to grieve something like a sibling relationship in 2024 as a person of color, as a Christian, as a woman, as a wellness professional, as an Indigenous person, all of those layers, all of that impacts how I grieve the relationship with my sibling.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, Rachel, thank you for sharing that. And I just want to know, like, can you give us a little more context around that behind maybe like what was the relationship maybe that you expected you would have at this age as a
Mm,
millennial? Yeah.
that's real. So I was tempted to be like, I expected to have a relationship with my sibling the way that everybody does. And I don't think that's necessarily true.
Mm,
But I was expecting to have a relationship with my sibling the way that people in my community and people in this world typically have relationships that they advertise. So something that
mm,
I learned is that on Instagram, on social media, for National Siblings Day, that's when you see all the siblings happy together and sharing like their jokes and all of that. That's a relationship that I wanted. I wanted one
mm,
that was healthy, that it was fun, that whether I was having a good day or a bad day, I could call them. Like I wanted them to be like my number one. I wanted them to be my maid of honor at my wedding. I wanted them to be the person that would advocate for me. And I
mm,
think what is hard that I'm realizing now is what I want our relationship to be. It's just not possible for a lot of reasons that are outside of my control. And so I had to accept that. And that made me begin the process of grieving, is accepting that I cannot force somebody to be what I want them to be. I need to accept them naturally and authentically. And then I need to decide, what is it like for that person to be in my life? And because of the harm, I had to make the drastic decision through trials of boundaries and family counseling and everything. The last step was estrangement. And I was like, there's something else that I can do. So this is the one that I'm choosing. So I thought what I wanted was, to visit them all the time and, hang out with them and their family, and they hang out with me and my family, vacation together, and be able to kiki and laugh and smile. I thought it would be safe and all of that, but unfortunately that's not what happened. So that's resulted to where we are now, of the lovely process of grieving.
Yeah, that's really important that you mentioned that. I think that the expectations that we have, especially of people, maybe the things that you were expecting of your sibling growing up, when you're met with something different than the expectation that you thought you had, it sounds like that really kicked off your grief process. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think to add just like a touch more to it,
Please.
In grieving the relationship with my sibling, I also was grieving aspects of my relationship with my parents. So I still have a relationship with my parents. That's something that we had to kind of pause for a little bit, because I had to kind of work through a lot of things solo. And a lot of the grieving that I had to do was realizing that they did not stand up, they did not advocate, they did not protect or provide in the way that I would want a parent to do that. So just because I'm grieving a specific relationship, it actually brought about so many other things that I needed to grieve as well. The relationship that I thought I was going to have with my parents, and the relationships that I had around me that were impacted by the relationship with my siblings, so my extended family, and deciding how I'm going to move forward with that. So I think that's kind of a surprise that comes with grief, is that you think, okay, I'm going to grieve the relationship with my sibling. And then all of these layers come to it. And it's like, oh, well, am I going to show up at this family wedding because the estranged sibling is going to be there? Oh, I'm still healing from this. Like, how do I show up in this phone call, in this family Zoom? Those are the surprises that I don't really think people talk about that much.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I'm glad that you mentioned that it's just also like, I'm hearing a ripple effect from this initial like relationship loss and realization, right, of the expectations being different, and also the unsafety. Like, it's not just about your expectations, it's also that like this person was unsafe to you, right? Because you mentioned like sibling abuse. And so the unsafety also triggers the grief as well, into a ripple effect of other environments that feel unsafe, and making you really kind of question, like, where is your safety?
Yeah. That's a big question that even today I'm still figuring out. Betrayal trauma is a thing for folks who are healing and going through the healing journey. And it's like for the people who enabled the abuser, for the people who allowed the abusive behavior to happen but didn't do anything, right? There's a sense of grief that I have for the relationship that I wanted with those people, because I do feel betrayed in that way. So what do I do with that? So that ripple effect, it's a long ripple, and it has many ripples. But I'm very thankful for, we'll get into it later, but I'm very thankful for all the systems that I have in place that are allowing me to grieve in a way that is healthy.
Yeah, it's so important. And we'll go into some of the supportive relationships that you have as well. I appreciate you kind of expanding a little bit more on like betrayal trauma. Can you just kind of highlight, like, really briefly, like betrayal trauma, maybe even like what sibling abuse is? There's just a couple of terms that you threw out there that like maybe some of our listeners don't actually understand fully what that means, and they might go on Instagram and try to figure it out. But I have a
You
professional right in
can.
front of me.
That is an option. Google is your friend. Use Google wisely, please. But yes, I just realized I was super clinical. Sorry.
All
so
good.
sibling abuse basically is a term to describe when abuse happens in a sibling relationship. So we hear abuse happen in different types of relationships. So romantic relationships, even the workplace, even like family, from like an older person or a trusted person to somebody who's more vulnerable and doesn't have protection. We hear abuse in those situations. So sibling abuse is that one sibling has abused the other. That's essentially what it is. It could be emotional, physical, sexual, any type of mistreatment and harm that has happened perpetually and that has caused trauma to the other person. So
Got
that's
it.
what sibling abuse is.
So there's like mistreatment or harm. Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Mistreatment,
Yeah.
harm. It could be verbally, emotionally, all the different ways that abuse typically happens. That happens in a sibling relationship. I think people are usually surprised by that because we often think that siblings are automatically best friends forever, right? But that's not the case. You still have to nurture and teach siblings how to care for each other. That's a rabbit hole that maybe we'll get down that another time. So that's sibling abuse. Betrayal trauma is essentially when the person who has been harmed, so I'll use myself example because we're here. So I have experienced trauma because people who were in positions of authority or power who could have prevented the abuse or who actually enabled the abuse, there's a sense of betrayal that I experienced from them that left me, my body, my soul, my emotions to be in a state of trauma. So the betrayal of the trust and the safety left trauma for me. So that's really common with people, like in this context, betrayal trauma, it could be with the parents, it could be with extended family members, cousins, stuff like that. That's pretty common when we see some type of abuse in a family context. The betrayal trauma is from people who exist in that family context who did not stop, who do not do anything to protect the person who's being harmed. They may talk behind the scenes like, oh, I'm so sorry this is happening to you, but in front of the abuser, they're acting like everything is fine. So that sense of betrayal leaves trauma. There's trauma from the actual abuser, and then there's trauma from the people who were around, and the lack of their action and advocacy and protection. Betrayal trauma.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Thanks so
I know
much
it's like kind of like convoluted.
No, thanks for explaining that. And I think what I also got from that's important, I think just from our backgrounds and highlighting too, is this piece around power, and that the mistreatment and harm also is like put in this dynamic of like using it as power over you, and power and control. And those, I know that when we hear that in our professions, that usually that lights up our heads a little bit around like, oh, is there abuse here, is that happening? So I appreciate you just kind of highlighting and describing what that means for some of our listeners who might not know. And so I'm wondering for you, just how did you start to grieve? Like, how did you know, like, obviously all of this stuff happened and it was just probably like, I'm sure it hit you like a wave, or, like just, oof. That's oftentimes what I hear around grief, is like grief can hit you like a wave. And I'm wondering, how did you start to grieve? How did you know that you were in grief?
Yeah. Oh, that's real, girl. I knew that I was in grief without actually realizing it. And then this moment happened. I was like, "Ooh, Rachel, you are grieving, girl," where memories that I had with this person, with my sibling, would start to come to my mind. And I felt very mixed about it. And so growing up, as like the abuse was happening from basically early childhood until my early 30s. I'm 33. So somewhat recent, I guess you could say. I realized that what I wanted my life to be with this person is actually just not going to happen. And so I was like, I can either sit here and continue to force things to happen and continue to be harmed while I'm trying to be protected, or I can begin the process of doing the thing I don't actually want to do. I don't want to grieve a relationship with my sibling. That's not something I want to do. I want to have an active, loving, thriving relationship. But I can't have that. And so I came to a point, and actually with the support of my husband and a few people in my community, they exist outside of me. So like, Rachel, I'm seeing that when you speak about your sibling, or these memories that you have, or when you're thinking about how to engage with your sibling, I'm seeing that you become depressed. I'm seeing you become really anxious. I'm seeing that you become hopeless. I'm seeing that you're not taking care of yourself. You're not eating well. You're not sleeping. You need to get that checked out with a therapist. And I was like, oh, you're right. And then in that, I was like, wow, I think I need to make the decision to be estranged. And then in that decision of being estranged, I was like, I need to grieve the relationship that I've always wanted with this person. So it kind of came a surprise to me. There's certain times of the year where I have certain traumatic memories with my sibling. And so during those times of the year, my body would remember, but my brain really didn't. And so I would start to feel depressed all of a sudden. I'm like, why am I feeling depressed? It's like May, it's like sun. And I was like, oh, there's a core memory that is like living inside of me, that of an abusive situation with my sibling that my body's remembering, and we're just going through it now. That was a point. And then I think another point that was like, ooh, Rachel, you're grieving, is when I got married. Before I got married, I didn't make the full decision to become estranged, but I was heading in that direction. I basically limited all contact and blocked and everything. And I was really, really happy, right? Dana was there. I was like on cloud 9. I was like, I'm marrying this wonderful man that God I literally prayed for this person, and he is here. And the photographer was taking a bunch of pictures, and she was like, okay, is there anybody else that we're missing, like a sister or anything else? And I was like, oh, okay. So then in that moment, I was like, this is a moment where I wish I could answer and say, yes, my sibling is here. Let's take a photo. But I couldn't say that. And instead I was just like, nope, we have everybody here. And so that was a moment where I was like, I had to remember the reasons why I made the decisions that I made to protect myself and all of that. But it still hurts to make that decision and to be in situations where like, I wish I could say something else, but I can't. And so those are probably the biggest moments where I was like, ooh, Rachel, there's some grieving that either you haven't done that you need to do, or we're approaching the next level of grieving. So kind of just snuck up.
Yeah.
I didn't really know it until talking about it with you and with other trusted people in my community and my therapist and my husband. Yeah.
Wow. Rachel, thanks for sharing that. I hear so much the importance of community around you, and being able to just like actually have people around you recognize also what was going on, and have them be explicit about like, hey, we're concerned about you, and saying that, and that allowing you to have like maybe some awareness that you already had too, because it wasn't just like other people telling you that. Like I heard you sharing that like you also had your own sense of awareness that you were starting to feel like, okay, things aren't the way that I wanted them to be, or like internally. And also I'm starting to feel like depressed, or like I'm not sleeping well, and noticing some of these like signs around grief, around just like, oof, I'm not feeling myself, or I'm feeling these very intense feelings at certain times of seasons and certain times of year, and maybe even having memories attached to those as well.
Yeah. And I think now that I am thinking about it a little bit deeper, there was a moment where I was like, oh, because I'm not grieving, I'm actually feeling more depressed, right? So our feelings, they stay, y'all. If we don't process them, they stay. We can repress them, and then one day they're going to come all the way up and like, hi, you haven't dealt with me in 5 years. We're here, and we're here to party, and we're going to do it up. So, I recommend process your feelings with a health professional. But there was a moment where I was like, I haven't processed this, and that's making my depression worse. That's making everything worse. And to be honest, I don't know if you remember this, Dana. I think it was like 2 years ago. You and I were having a FaceTime, and I was just bawling the whole time. And you were like, I'm worried about you. We're going to FaceTime every week. And I was like, girl, like, it's not that serious. Like, I'm sad. Like, it's cool. And you're like, no. For context, Dana and I do not live in the same city. We are actually on different coasts. 3-hour difference. Very sad. And so we would contact each other regularly, but like you saw how bad I was in that moment. And you were like, actually, I need to amp up the amount of support for this person. I'm not going to ask you. And I think you even said, if you say no to this, I'm going to speak to your husband. And I'm going to be like, yo, like, can we chat about this? Because I'm really worried. And my husband was also really worried too. So it was those things that let me know that because I was not grieving, unprocessed grief was turning into anger and depression and anxiety for me. And there was a heaviness. And I was like, I need to do the thing I don't actually want to do, which is grieve this relationship. And instead of trying to keep it alive and hurting myself and hurting them too, like I'm demanding something of them that they just don't want to give, right? That's not fair to them. I need to do the thing by grieving and coming to terms with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do remember that. And I think it was really, you know, it was just a time in your life where you're like going through it. And it was important, I think, just knowing that you had other people around you in your corner. And because I know you, so this is like the little caveat is, you know, you may not necessarily like threaten someone that you're going to bring their support system into supporting them. However, you know, Rachel and I go back over a decade, and I think just because of our relationship, because I knew Rachel, I know that like Rachel really listens to people like in her inner circle, like and really like just cherishes their feedback. And so like that was going to be that I knew that was going to be like an important thing. And so for our listeners, use your discernment in your relationships for sure. But that was it's really just it makes me feel glad to know that you were able to actually reach out for support, and that was also like an important moment for you as well. I'm wondering, just kind of as we shift a little bit into like grief and that question around like how do you grieve, and certainly we asked about like we kind of went into like what does grief look like, how did you know you were in grief. I'm wondering like is there a specific or right way to grieve? Sometimes people wonder that. We know that grief is unique to each person, and so maybe that is answering part of that question. But I'm just wondering, like, is there a specific way? Is there a right way to grieve?
Yeah, that's a great question. Girl, I wish there was. Can I be honest? Like, I wish there was like a formula that's like, hey, do this then, and then 2 months out, do this, and then 3 months out, do that. I low-key wish that was the case. We do see trends, so let me like respect that. We do see trends, the whole stages of grieving. That's a thing. What those stages look like per person, how often you go through those stages, and how the stages show up in your life is very individualized. But I think there is some validity to the stages of grieving. For me personally, it was just a lot of crying and a lot of accepting that this is what had happened to me, and this is a decision that I have to make. And I have to let go, and I don't want to let go. And so a lot of that, it looked like distancing myself from things that seemed too difficult. So part of that was putting a pause on communication with my parents. As a child of immigrants, you're putting a pause on a communication with your parents? That's funny. Girl, I did that. And that was so hard. And that's not something that we do, right? Culturally speaking, we don't do those things. We're very family oriented. So that was a whole thing. Shout out to my husband for navigating those conversations with my parents. And shout out to my parents for respecting my boundaries during that time. It also looked like incorporating more time in my day to make sure I was doing the things that I needed to do to grieve. So whether that would be moving my body, because for me, grief was like, it came in the form of like depression, anxiety. Those things tend to be really heavy for me. And I'm like, I need to move my body. Otherwise, this is just so burdensome that I feel like I cannot move. And that makes me feel even more isolated and more depressed. So I was like, if all I do is stretch for 2 minutes today, awesome. And so looking for opportunities to do that, changing my schedule for that. And then sharing with my community that I like trusted. I was like, hey, this is something that I'm going through right now. As a Christian, prayer is one of the most important things that I do. But I wasn't in a place to pray that much. Like, that's how deep into the grieving, into the anger and the sadness and the like, well, let me like, barter with you, God. Like, if I give you this and maybe you'll like, change the situation with my sibling, right? But I was like, I'm not in a place to be praying. I was like, so I need to tell people I know to pray and to pray hard. So thank you to my community for praying. But that's what grieving looked in the beginning. That's what it looked like for me. And just really being like, yo, this is what we're doing. Also, shout out to my therapist. Having a really great therapist to kind of walk you through and be like, it's okay to fall apart. And I think that's what I realized. I never let myself fully accept that I was abused by my sibling. I never let myself fully accept. Therefore, I never let myself fully accept that this is something that I need to grieve. So by opening the door and saying, okay, emotions, okay, memories, with therapy, with community, with God, we are going to manage this together. And let's just see what happens. So some days I was like, wow, like this is really great. The sun is shining. Like, let me go wear like, a pretty orange dress. Other days was just like, it's just swimming with memories, with traumatic memories and bringing in memories of anger and all of that. And being like, Rachel, this is really hard. And allowing myself to say that it was hard and allowing myself to cry, allowing myself to be like, I'm not answering emails for 3 hours. Honestly, grieving was allowing myself to fall apart and to be triggered, be triggered. Whoo, there was a season where I was really triggered by, Mother's Day, Father's Day, National Siblings Day. And then you see people with like their families outside. I'm like, wow, I wonder if in 10 years, this sibling's going to be abused for the other one. Like, I should not be thinking that. Like, that should not be a thought. But because I was grieving, that was a thought that I had. And I was like, dang, Rachel, that's really intense. But that's real. That's where you are right now.
Yeah. Rachel, I'm hearing like the invitation that your therapist gave you to give yourself the permission to let yourself have your feelings, to let yourself really be able to grieve and be able to process it and be in a space to be real with yourself and authentic with yourself. And I'm also hearing like boundaries that you needed to have there was helpful for you, and movement was also helpful for you, and spiritually prayer was helpful for you. Even that awareness, which I think I'm just most impressed by also in hearing you share that awareness of like, I'm not a place where I can feel like I am praying in the way that I want to. So other people might need to just like, support me in that. And I think that that's also important. There's just to hear how much of this was both like invitations of permission to allow yourself to feel all these feelings, allowing yourself to feel triggered and not avoid it. I think that was also like but you have also incredible awareness and a support system with you to be able to do all of those things as well.
Yeah. I think something that people find surprising about grieving, when you're grieving like a person who's alive, but you're just not having a relationship with them, or grieving a dream, when you're grieving something outside of the traditional grieving of somebody who is deceased, that person who's grieving still needs all of the traditional grieving things, right? So when a friend of mine was going through her grief process, I'm like, okay, she probably wants like dinner sent to her. Let me get her like a Grubhub gift card. Another friend of mine, I was like, I'm gonna text her like every week. Another one, I was like, I'm gonna make sure I text her on, the person's birthday, on the day of remembrance for that person. Those are things that you do when you know somebody is grieving the death of another person. It's the same thing with me. I was like, I need people to show up for me because I can't do stuff. I can't cook. Thank God my husband knows how to cook. I was like, I'm not in a space to just show up and kiki at my friend's house, but I need somebody to be like, hey, how are you doing today? Have you showered? Right? What are ways that I could be praying for you? So if you know somebody who is grieving a non-traditional thing, they probably want you to show up in the way that a traditional grief would say.
That's good. And that actually flows into some like questions I have for you around just like you had mentioned about one particular identity of just like being a child of immigrants and how that kind of influenced your processing grief. And I'm wondering how have your identities influenced maybe both your processing of grief and also how you heal?
It definitely delayed my grief. So because I didn't want to disappoint my parents, I don't want to be embarrassment to my family. I want to make sure that I look good and great in front of everybody because that's what children of immigrants want to do. They want to be worth the struggle of their parents' immigration. That's the number one thing that we want to do. And by me going through this grief journey and accepting things I didn't want to accept, that meant disappointing my parents, potentially putting the spotlight on them when quite frankly, it's not even about them. It's not even about my sibling. It's about me and the fact that I'm grieving and I'm going through something. So that aspect of my identity really delayed that process. Being married and having really close friends allowed the process to happen because of you, because of my husband, because of people in my community, able to say the hard things that I needed to hear, but I didn't really know for myself. That let me know that the process needed to begin. And to your second question of like, how has aspects of my identity brought healing? First and foremost, being a Christian. Y'all, being a Christian is not easy. I know that there are some Christians that are like, oh yeah, once you like start to have like a relationship with God, like your life gets better. That's cool. The whole Bible tells me that that's not true though. All the Christians that I know, that tells me that's not true. My life tells me that's not true. So inviting God into my grief journey. So there's specific books that I was reading in the Bible of people who were grieving and seeing how Jesus showed up for those people. I think part of the grief process for me was still a sense of like shock and surprise. Like, how did we get here? Am I the only one? Like, what am I missing? And so reading examples of families in the Bible who also had dysfunction. And I was like, oh, this is not new to God.
Wow.
Okay, cool. Like, I'm not super alone in this. So my Christian identity definitely helped me. My identity as a wife, something, and as a friend, so wife and friend, something that for people who are grieving, that is really difficult for us to do. We want social interactions kind of, but we also don't want to be a burden. And we don't really know, and let me speak from the I, let me not project on other people, but I have heard this from other people who grieve. So I'll say that. I wanted to be in spaces. I didn't know how to show up in spaces. And I also knew that I wasn't in a place to show up as my usual self. I'm funny. I'm lighthearted. I like to make jokes. Like, I'm like, yo, let's just like chill. What's good? I wasn't able to do that when I was, especially in those the beginning phases of grieving. And I felt like a burden. I felt like a burden on my husband, especially because I had to change aspects of my work. So I was like, I literally cannot show up to work in the same way. Yeah. So our finances are changing, right? I cannot show up to some of my friendships the same way. I had a friend, one of my closest friends, who lives in a different borough, but I can still see them. I didn't see them for months. And they were like, hey, like, are you mad at me? Like, are we in a friendship breakup? And I was like, dang. I was like, I am so sorry. I was like, I just don't know how to show up not feeling like a burden And she was like, girl, you are never a burden. And I was like, wow. So even though I know those things, I needed to hear it and I need to be reminded of those things. And so that aspect of my identity also brought healing. The last part, and then I promise I'll stop babbling, being an Indigenous person. There is something about being part of a group of people who have a history of being, honestly, I'm not going to say, what's the word that I want to say, Rachel? Who have a history of being harmed in a way of displacement and violence. And we are still here. And I was like, yo, if my ancestors were able to deal with very different things I'm dealing with, but still horrific and lots of tragedy and lots of trauma. That low-key generational trauma is really all. So low-key, I'm still dealing with that too. But that, I am a Coptic person. This is what we do. So if my aunties, if the other Coptic people that I know, if these years of resilience and healing can happen for them, then it can happen for me too. So there is something in like my blood, something in my spirit that was like, yo, do you know who you are? You are a child of God. So that means XYZ. You are a wife to a husband that treats you better than any human being ever, and he will provide and protect you, even if it means death. You are a friend to people that will drop everything and be with you. Shoot. You are a friend to people that will FaceTime you once a week, 3-hour difference, and be like, if you don't do this, I'm going to tell your husband, right? These are the friends that I have. You are a Coptic person. You are a Black and Indigenous person. Hello, double whammy there. So do you not know that it is literally like, yes, it is horrible that you're experiencing things and you have to grieve from it, and that is not fair for you. But don't you know that you are built for this and more? You are an overcomer. And I was like, I am. So that was a moment where I was like, girl, who are you? Like, Rachel, who are you? And I had to be reminded of that. So I think that was a very surprising aspect, my Coptic identity, because my Coptic identity also delayed the process, right? It also was the pressure to say, you need to deal with this relationship that's abusive for longer. So I was like, it delayed it, but it also gave me strength. And that's one of the many reasons why grief is so complex, because the same thing can give you multiple emotions, right? I have lots of love and laughter memories with my sibling. I look at things, I'm like, oh, I remember when my sibling and I did X, Y, Z, and it makes me laugh and smile. And then I also look at the traumatic memories, and it does not make me smile. It makes me cry, right? But all from the same entity. And so grief is just so... That's why we need mental health professionals. That's why we need community. For me as a Christian, that's why I need God in that. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
No, Rachel, just like so good to hear you share how you resourced yourself. Like you resourced yourself like generationally, culturally, ancestrally, spiritually, community wise, like the ways in which you were like, wait a second, like this is what I need to remind myself of that question of like, who am I? And coming back to yourself in your grief to like allow yourself or help yourself to heal. That's gonna stick with me. That's so good. And the thing that also, you mentioned, I think that really resonated with me as well, of this feeling of feeling a burden with your grief. And I was wondering if you might just like share a little bit more of like, just for people who may not understand, like, oh, why would you ever feel like a burden with your grief? Some people might not actually get that. But that is a really common feeling, something I've felt too, of just like, oh, do I have to manage my grief or manage myself around other people who aren't necessarily feeling down or feeling like the way that I'm feeling, or might not notice that, the bubbly person that I am, or the, friendly person I am, is not the one that's going to show up today, or may not show up for social things or whatever it is, the ways in which you were sharing it as well. I'm just wondering if you could like just share just a little bit about like what is that burden that you feel?
Yeah. Oh, girl, that burden is heavy. The burden for me was I don't want other people to feel like they are responsible for healing me. And I don't want them to feel like they are and healing and grief are two different things. Well, that's a whole other thing. But they are not responsible for making me move faster in my grief. And they're not responsible for holding me. And also, do they want me right now? Because I'm not cute. I'm not funny. I'm not the Rachel that they were friends with or that they met years ago, right? Like, I'm ugly cry. What they don't talk about is the weight gain or the weight loss. I also have like a few health issues. And so the health issues in combination with the grief, I gained at least 30 to 35 pounds that I'm still in the process of working off now, right? So I'm not feeling great in my body. I don't want to show up. Like, you know me as like cute. I'm not feeling like that. So I don't want to, it's that burden that's like, I can't show up in the way that I used to be able to show up. Do you still want me? And can you navigate who I am in this moment right now? A very tangible example of this, and if this is too TMI, we'll cut this out. And if my husband is listening, God bless you, husband. Extra crowns in heaven for you. When I was really in it, let's see, this was probably maybe 6 months after we just got married. Right. And so we're like, we just got married. We just moved. Like, this is fun. Right. Cool. Bam. Grieving started. I was like, wow, everything sucks. Depression hit, weight gain hit, had to change aspects of my life because I was just not able to show up at work, all of that. My libido, it went down. I don't know. 0 seems like too high of a number. It was in the negatives, if that's even possible. And I was just like, yo, and I'm a newlywed. So I'm like, yo, like, I'm really trying to smash, but like, I have no libido right now. You know, like, my poor husband, who is loving me and supporting me through this. And we're so excited that we just got married. We're newlyweds. And I have no libido because I just didn't have the desires. And so that was a burden to be like, yo, I can't show up in this way. So that was a burden. But he honestly was like fine with it because he thankfully is like aware of mental health and it was with me in the journey. And he was like, yo, like, what we're not going to do is force you to do things you don't want to do. What we are going to do is be here together in a way that is supportive to you in your healing. So whatever your libido looks like from now until forever, I'm with you, girl. And I was like, wow. And that made me bawl my eyes out. So it's like, I don't deserve this kind man. So that's a very tangible TMI. Of how like that burden shows up in different aspects of your life and of your relationships. I can't believe I just said that, but it's true.
It's true. It's true. And I thanks for sharing that because that's real. Like, there are probably other listeners out there who have experienced maybe similar things where they're like, man, is it me? Like, is it the grief? Is it like the situation? Like, what is it? Do I need to like, you know, what's going on? But like, for people to actually know, like, yes, your libido will be like impacted by grief. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to also just hear the beauty of your husband just being like, I'm with you. Like, I hear you, like, to be really like supportive in that and to work with you in that and support you in that, knowing that this was a change. This was a real change in which grief changes you. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm wondering just also kind of thinking about other questions I had for you as well. Of just, I'm wondering about any sort of like healing rituals, if there is to do something with grief, right? Being with grief, certainly, but, you know, for me, I only knew of rituals of celebrations of life and memorial services and beyond that. And beyond that, I didn't really have any other rituals or ways to think about how I was to be with my grief individually and collectively. And I really had to learn these. I mean, I obviously had learned them in my profession, like professionally, but for me experiencing it personally, I had to learn with my own therapist and from other people, from my community, from my friends, around who've been through similar and different grief journeys, about different ways that they learn to hold and process grief. And so I'm wondering for you, what are some ways you've learned to hold and process grief, or what are some rituals or things in terms of like if there is something to come back to with grief, like how, like what did you do, ritual or tradition or wise, if it's related to your identities or anything like that? Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a great point because we think that rituals and having memorials and the way that we remember people or dreams or whatever it is that you're grieving, it has to look a certain way. If you want to do a celebration of life, cool. But if that's not your vibe, you can find another way, right? So I hope that people who are listening feel that they have the agency to decide what grieving looks like for them. As long as it's healthy, do it up, right? And that's when you really work with a mental health professional to make sure that it's in a healthy way. So that's like first and foremost, answer number one. For Rachel, what that looks like, nothing really ritualistic, but more so, maybe this is a ritual, not running away from it. And so even to this day, I am years into grieving the relationship with my sibling. And there are still moments of like deep sadness where I feel like I'm at stage one of like shock, or I'm like at another stage of like anger. And I'm like, Rachel, we should be further along than this. Rachel, why are we still in this process, right? So mind you, I have 2 master's degrees in mental health counseling. And I'm still I'm still struggling with these very real things. So it don't matter how many degrees you got, how many fancy letters are after your name. We all go through it somehow, my dear. So for me, the ritual is to not run away from the grief. I have to fight the temptation every day, multiple times a day, to not suppress my emotions. So when something, National Sibling Day, excuse me. Huge trigger for me, right? I'm grieving my sibling. And so now we have a national day to celebrate siblings. So it's all over my Instagram, all over Facebook, all of this stuff. And so what I do on that day, because that's usually a big day where triggers happen and lots of grief stuff comes up, is I say, wow, Rachel, so much is happening right now. Let's process it. Let's get it out, girl. And even when I'm getting it out and I'm saying, wow, I feel so sad. I feel so angry. Oh, there's so many wonderful memories that we had. Wow, maybe I should do something else. Oh man, I'm so stressed out by all of this. Even as I'm processing and unpacking it, I'm still like, okay, well, we're done now. Bye. And I'm like, no, Rachel, we are not done. I have to constantly invite myself back into grieving. And I know when I'm done grieving, that's not really I know when I'm done unprocessing in that moment, or processing in that moment, or unpacking in that moment. I know what that feels like. There's a sense of like emptiness, not a sad emptiness, but a sense of I unloaded everything. I was like, I describe it kind of like a zit, where you finally popped the zit and all the pus came out and the zit's like, cool, give me like a few hours and I'm gonna go away. Right. So once all of that came out, I know what that feels like for me.
Yeah.
And I sit there, I cry, I hug myself. Usually I'm like, hey, text people. I'm like, hey, I'm having a really bad day. I let my husband know, so he'll pray for me. He'll just like be there and sit with me. And I just sit there and I allow the grief to happen. That moment of grief, it's always happening, right? But in that moment, it's especially heavy and I just allow that to happen. It also means that like I may not be on Instagram that much that day. It also means that I may not be answering my emails as quickly as I usually do. That also means instead of going to the gym, maybe my exercise that day is stretching, right? So honoring where my body is, my mind and my soul is at that moment is also a big part of grieving, which I don't like to do because I'm very impatient. But I have to do it. So that's what I don't think there's a right way, but for me, that typically is what it looks like, is allowing the grief moments to happen. And I'm like, cool, we are here, buddy. I have my tea, I have my tissues, I have my comfy pillow. Hit me. I have my journal. Let's do this.
Wow. Yeah. I hear you in this moment of just like, I'm going to meet my grief where it's at. And like, it takes a lot of courage to do that. It takes a lot of like, awareness again, to be able to do that. And so, and a lot of, I mean, you have so much work you've done with yourself and self-awareness and reflection too, to be able to like bring yourself to the moments to do that. And so for some people, for some of our listeners, this might be an idea for you. And, you know, everybody's different though, as you said. And I think that that's also really important for us to share here, as well as that like everyone's grief and healing journey looks different. And for you, like, this is what really works for you. And just being met in the moment with like with a little bit of like challenge also is important for you to actually like move towards some change for yourself, some change to action. I'm wondering for you, just like you have so much wisdom and throughout your grief and healing journey and wisdom in general that I just admire so much. And I'm just wondering what's been the most important thing you've learned in being with and processing your grief?
Okay. I've learned that, and I didn't really know this was the case until I started grieving. You don't need to heal from the loss of the person, the thing, the dream. That's not something that you necessarily like. You process it and you grieve it, but healing implies that it's something. Healing, I feel like healing can be part of grieving, because I think in the grieving process, you realize that because a person is not, here anymore, or that dream is not happening, that brings up aspects of your life and your identity that you're like, oh, actually, I didn't realize that I needed to heal from XYZ. This person not being in my life makes me realize that I actually have anger issues or like whatever it is. So I feel they can be convoluted, but I feel like there's also this idea with healing that like, because something bad happened, you now have to heal and recuperate and find a way to become healthy again. Grieving, you don't stop being healthy while you're grieving. Because you are grieving, you may have moments or days where it's harder to do the things that are healthy for you, but that doesn't mean that you like stop that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's so good. That's so good. Right, because grief isn't unhealthy. It's just a natural response.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, you can also just be with your grief.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's real.
Oh, go ahead. Say it. Yeah.
Okay. That's good that I appreciate that you mentioned that, because the things that I wrote down was like, honestly, just give yourself time and cry and hug yourself. If you want to do like a memorial, do it. Yeah. If you want to like get a tattoo, give yourself some time and then actually see if you want to get a tattoo. But like, don't feel like, I think there's this pressure that we have with grieving that we need to do something to prove that we're still sad. And we need to let the world know that our life is never going to be the same. And I think that's real, but what we're actually trying to do is like really hold on to that person or that memory or that dream, instead of like actually going through the grieving process and allowing ourselves to experience joy and peace and all of that. And with the knowledge that that person, that entity, that dream is not with us anymore. So there's a lot of pressure that we feel to like please others and to show up in society in a way that says like, yes, I will never get over this thing that I'm grieving about, and you need to know about it. And it actually becomes it becomes unhealthy, an unhealthy filter on our identity. There's a lot of pressure to like prove to people that you're grieving. There's a lot of pressure in society, in my culture specifically, like you need to be miserable for X number of days so that people know that that person meant something to you. And I was like, wow, that's like very prescriptive. That's like a lot. People are like, I have to I'll use myself as an example, right? Every like day every National Siblings Day, I must say like, I am grieving my sibling, right? I have to do that. No, like there's pressure for me to do that. And I'm like, where is this pressure coming from? So like for other folks who are grieving, there's pressure to be like, I have to get a tattoo with this person's name to let people know that this was the most important person in my life. I have to follow the dreams that they had for me. Ooh, that is a
Mm.
big one. Since this person is no longer here, and they had this dream for me to do XYZ, I have to stop my dreams and pick up this person's dream to honor them really well, right?
Wow.
It kind of, grief can take, okay, I'm going to try to say this really gracefully. Grief can take an unhealthy place in our lives.
Mm.
It can be the driver if we let it. And
say more.
I like, okay, I'm what you're experiencing is me making sure that I'm saying what I actually want to say. An identity I forgot to mention is that I'm neurodivergent. So when I make interesting faces like that, that's my neurodivergent brain being like, tingle, tingle. So the way that this is how I want to say it. There's a pressure that we feel to say, because I am grieving, I need to make sure that I don't feel joy, or I am not feeling at peace. People can't see me smile because then they're going to think that I'm over this person, or I'm over this dream or this situation, right? And then there's also the other side of it that's like, I'm going to move so fast so that people know how strong I am. I see that a lot when people are grieving romantic relationships, and also friendship breakups. They're like, I'm gonna just move so fast so that everybody knows that, like, this next person that I'm with, that like I'm good, and because I'm dating this person, that I'm healed, and my ex never did anything to me that I can't ever repair from or heal from, and like all of that, right? So there's a pressure to either go really, really fast or to go really, really slow. That was a surprise for me.
I see, yeah.
And we we make decisions from the grief being the driver's seat of saying, no, you need to prove to people that I'm still here. So just go be extra sad today. You have to cry every single time you get a trigger in front of people. You have to make sure that you go really, really fast so that you are dating the next person and everybody knows how strong you are. So I think that
like
was
notions.
probably like the biggest thing.
Yeah, it's like notions of grief or expectations around what grief should be. Anytime you hear those like shoulds, right? About like, should grief be a certain way? I'm hearing like can really drive you in a way to not really grieve authentically in the way that you would like to. We are getting close on our time here, but I'm wondering for you, you mentioned how your identities have sort of shaped your grief and healing process. And I'm also just wondering in reverse, like, how have grief and healing changed or shaped your identities? And you started to talk a little bit about that, about like, how did that change you? And so I was just wondering if you wanted to share anything else about how grief and healing influenced or shaped your identities into maybe even how you identify now.
Yeah. One way that it changed my identity is that an identity that I have is that I have an estranged person. I don't know what the term is if you're the person who started the estrangement, but that's an identity that I have, right? I have a niece and a nephew that I do not have a relationship with. So technically I'm an aunt. That's a new aspect of my identity. But I don't participate in that because I have decided to grieve this person. And so that's a hard thing for me to wrestle with. I think another aspect of my identity that has changed is as a daughter. So what does it look like for me to relate to my parents, respect the fact that my parents have a relationship with their older child who abused me? What does that mean for me? What does that mean for our communication? And so how I show up as a daughter is different. I have new boundaries now. And I'm more direct. And I also have a lot, because of grieving, I have a lot more grace for my parents that I never thought that I would have.
Wow.
And so how I view them. How I view them is different now, because before I was just especially when I was in that anger phase of my grief. And I still go back there sometimes, y'all. Let's get real. We go through these stages, as a roller coaster ride. In that anger phase, I was like, how can my parents let this happen to me? How do they not know? And then through more grieving, and also just more time with God and with mental health professionals, I was like, wow, like I'm really able to see how people who are my parents, who had life happen to them in the way that it happened, at the ages that it happened to them, I can see how they wouldn't know how to step in this way. In a way that I would have wanted them to. So yes, I'm still angry. Yes, I still wish that they, did X, Y, Z to protect me. And I can understand why they didn't. And so as their daughter, I'm able to give them more grace, and be like, I understand. I'm still pissed, but I understand. And I also understand that you want to have a relationship with your children. Just because I don't have a relationship with my sibling does not mean that you should not have a relationship with your older child. Right? So it changed the way that I show up as a daughter. I also have to say it helps to do these scary things, like to set boundaries, to be estranged, to go through this grieving process with the privileges that I have, right? I have the privilege of a husband who will literally stand up to protect and provide for me, right? That's in terms of how we have our marriage, that's part of our vows that we have, right? I have a community, I have a tight-knit community that will go ham for me. So those are the privileges that I have that give me some empowerment to do those scary things. So that's something that I also like very much want to own. But my identity changed in that way too. And also like as a Christian, I'm able to experience God in a whole new way. I'm able to see how family of origin dysfunction is not anything new. I'm able to see how he is a healer. Yes, through all of the situations of the Bible, but also in my life. Healing is different than grieving, yes, but there is God as a healer showing up in my grieving process to be with me as I'm processing and dealing with all of these things. And knowing that what grieving means in a Christian context means letting go of things and moving forward in your life in a certain way. It doesn't mean you forget. It doesn't mean you're just happy all the time. It means that you have decided that you want to move forward in your life in a certain way. And therefore you are going to come to an acceptance of things, and you have the strength to do that. Because there's a type of life that I want to live. And grieving allows me to do that because I want to be healthy and because I want to do all of these things. I need to grieve. And that allows me to move forward in my life in a healthy way. So I would say those are the... Girl, I forgot what the question was.
That's how grief and healing have shaped your identity and changed it. And I think that's really important just for people to hear that like these situations like not only have ripple effects, as we said earlier in this episode, but just that they change you and they change your identities and they shape your identities in different ways. Kind of as like a last question for you, I'm wondering, like, what do you wish people knew about just this topic in particular? What do you wish you like, or even if you want to take this other question of what do you wish you knew that you know now, that you didn't know when you were first dealing with it? But yeah, what do you wish people knew about this topic, specifically about relationship loss or life being different than the one you thought it would be with your sibling? And just maybe even there's so many themes that you had here around boundaries and sibling abuse and betrayal trauma and family of origin expectations. Like, I'm just wondering, kind of, what do you wish people knew about grief, healing, and identity related to these things?
Yeah. I wish I knew this. So y'all be better than me. I wish I knew that delaying grief was harming me a lot. And because I was scared to grieve, because I was scared to say, this is a relationship I need to grieve, and I was forcing something that was not healthy, that was not working, and how that harmed me mentally, physically, emotionally, all of the lees, quite frankly. If I just started grieving earlier, like, and that's the thing, like deep down, I was like, yo, I know what I need to do. I know that I need to like process all of this, and I know I need to be honest, but I was like, I just don't want to. I'm too scared of what people are going to say. I'm too scared I'm going to do it wrong. I don't feel like I'm able to do it well. So I had a lot of fear that was preventing me from grieving. And I
Mm.
wish people knew that there are other things that you grieve, right? I started all of this by saying that the big thing I'm grieving is a life that I thought I was going to have.
Yeah.
And there's a sense of like, oh, well, am I not grateful enough for the life that I have? Because I like the life that I have. Like, yo, I like my life. It's really cool. But there's aspects of it that were a surprise to me. And there's aspects of it that I did not actually want to come around in this way. And so there's still
Mm.
things that, yes, I need to be grieving. And so I wish people knew that a lot of what people are actually experiencing, with things like depression and anxiety and anger, there's actually a call for you to grieve that thing. There's a call
Mm.
for you to grieve the fact that your dream job is not what you wanted it to be. And so, yes, you are getting angry at your micromanaging boss. And yes, you're getting mad about your paycheck. But really, what's happening is you need to grieve the fact that your dream job was not actually your dream job. And you were wrong. And that's okay. You're not a bad person. You're not stupid for that. It's just you thought your dream job was going to look like XYZ. And it's not
Mm.
looking like that. And on the other side of it, I'm going to say this carefully. On the other side, when you go through that grieving process, is freedom. Not to say
Mm.
being free from that person or that dream. Like, you don't want to be free in the way that, like, oh, I'm free. Like, I don't have to think about them anymore. That's like problematic. What I mean by freedom is that it allows you to move forward in your life authentically. You're saying, I'm
Mm.
accepting things for how they actually are, and I'm trusting myself that I'm actually able to deal with it instead of forcing a different reality to happen. By
Mm.
grieving my desire is this person, this relationship, I'm trusting that I can handle the difficulties that come my way, and therefore how I move forward in life will be lighter and healthier and happier. And I
Mm.
deserve that. So I feel like grief was never advertised to me in that way.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
advertised as like, you need to be miserable for 5 million years. And I was like, well, what happens if you feel a little bit happy along the way? What happens if you're grieving something that's not a deceased person? So
Yeah.
it looks different.
It does. It does. Rachel, thank you. You've dropped so many just gems today. And I'm also just so grateful for you sharing so much of yourself and just being so open to sharing yourself in this way. And as we wrap up, Rachel, I'm wondering if our listeners wanted to connect with you, which I think we've agreed that that's okay with you. How would you like them to
Yeah.
connect with you? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much, Dana, for allowing me to be here. What you're doing is very much needed, and there are people who are going to experience healing and freedom and a sense of peace and authenticity in their grieving journey because of your podcast. And so thank you for the work that you're doing and for ushering in, especially for folks of color, for folks with multiple marginalized identities, where grief is weird and it is stigmatized. You are saying, hi, I want to be part of the change, and I'm leading that. And so I'm very grateful for that. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you want to connect with me, I would love to connect. So you can find me on Instagram at Real with Rachel Ann. You can find me on TikTok also at Real with Rachel Ann. I'm on the interwebs, so I have a website. It is rachelancoaching.com. You can email me. My email is hello@rachelancoaching.com. I'm happy to support you however I can. I do provide the traditional like one-on-one sessions, but I also do have a group membership program called the Journal Club. So that's for Christian women of color who want to incorporate God and prayer into their wellness journey through journaling. And I send them journaling kits with everything that they need. So I have that. I have digital resources. I also have monthly prayer calls. I have a newsletter that comes out every week. So I like to do things so that people who want wellness support, specifically Christian women of color who want wellness support, they are able to get it in any way that they need to. And as a thank you for all of you who are listening, I do have a little something that I'd love to give you. So Dana, I'll send you the link and you can like put it in the description. But it's a book with 7 journal prompts and a guide to journaling. So journaling is, I didn't talk about it enough, my bad, but journaling is one of the ways that I've been able to grieve and process a lot of these things that I'm talking about. It is a healthy way. Research shows that journaling is a very healthy way to get all of stuff happening out in here. And it's a very healthy way to get it out, to express that energy externally in a way that is healthy instead of like punching people or other things. So journaling is your friend in that way. And so I'd love to give you all that. It's a journaling guide. Dana will put down the link so that it can support you in your journaling and in your wellness journey.
Wow. Thank you, Rachel. Wow. I'm just going to say thank you on behalf of our listeners for that gift. Yeah. And I will definitely put all that information in the show notes as well. I just want to thank you so much for your time. Also just again for sharing so much of yourself and just being authentic in it. And I'm excited for you all to connect with Rachel offline in some of the ways that she just mentioned. And stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you for being here.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Untethered to Rooted. Untethered to Rooted is produced and hosted by me, Dana Daugherty. Original music was composed and performed by the ever-talented Daniel Dickinson. Thanks so much to our guests for sharing with us today. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. And follow us on social at Untethered to Rooted. And if you didn't like it, what podcast? Dana who? Until next time, take and give good care.